episode 9, how to reduce your BIM coordination issues by 53%. What is the root cause of bad BIM? We will talk about the opportunity that a BIM team had to discover the benefits of doing BIM and using it in the right way. And then we will see how this team were able to achieve 53% fewer BIM issues. I'll take 10% actually. So spoiler alert, it's not about just the tools, it's about the process. So let's go to the first one, which is the root cause of bad BIM. So in 2015, Plannly was chosen to be a part of a team at Autodesk University, BIM version 1.0, which was started by building 3D models. And then there was 2.0, where these models were put together and finding issues and problems. And now there are more users for BIM and more people using BIM. And we get to this version 3.0, this era of an operational production system where there are so many users that there has to be a very important thought process for people to actually get the benefits that they are looking for. So it was a journey to an operational production system. The evolution from 3D modeling to 2.0, which was more visual and collaborative, and then 3.0, where we were finding a lot more uses for our models, like procurement and estimation purposes, VR, etc. So what's happening today? Unfortunately, we're still experiencing thousands of issues and clashes and challenges, and mostly a reactive coordination process. Out of all BIM uses, the most common is coordination. We put models together and we make it a semi-automatic process where we find issues and we fix them. But because we're working in 3D, we're finding more and more clashes. So the typical workflow is that we model for a week or two, and then we have the coordination meetings and find clashes. And another 2 weeks and update our models, and then we do the cycle over a few months to try and get good quality clash-free models. And yet after all that going back and forth, we still end up making these mistakes. We have the tools to model correctly. We know when and where these clashes will most likely happen, but we still run clash detection and get this long list of all the clashes in our models. So we had to get to the bottom of this and find out what is the root cause of this. The root cause in 5 ways. We have 2 objects trying to occupy the same space, and that's what flags a clash. This usually because the models were uploaded at the same time, because that's what the contract tells you to do, whether it is specified daily or weekly or monthly. The reason why that is because we are operating using a traditional phase-based workflow, and in turn, we are creating large batches of work. So what could the solution be? How about we plan and agree on smaller batches of work, and we get people to agree on a specific scope, and also between teams to agree on a sequence that works by having a priority structure. Plannly was able to get the teams from the owner, that is the client, the architect, the engineer, the contractor, all in one room for some time, being able to understand the sequence of events, processes, best practices, etc., and cross-company understanding between all of them. And we all know how difficult it is to get all of these teams in one room. So the team at Plannly had asked these teams if they had the opportunity to refine and improve these best practices and processes to make them efficient, how would they do it? So they got together and they had given their feedback to get the most optimal workflow and timeline for a project. So it was for the good of the project and not for the good of the architect or engineer or contractor. This was all of them butting heads for the good of the project. Is this something people can understand? Let's see what this means in simple terms. So the first thing that was discovered is that priority matters. If you look at a building and all of the components and elements in it, the sequencing in which you model is very important because, as we know, it is built in a certain sequence on site as well. And if you don't follow a priority structure and fix things that take opportunity over others earlier, this will cause more issues and more rework later. It's not possible to prioritize easily if you have just 3 or 4 or 5 major phases of a project. It's very difficult to prioritize with so few phases of the project because you have got so much of work to issue in each phase. So what Plannly and the team had done was broke this phase-based approach down into smaller stages. So 17 stages for that specific project, to be exact, to have a more focused group to prioritize work within a stage. And closing out those stages is much more easier and manageable as you have smaller batches of work to issue at smaller time intervals. It also meant that they were able to start the right teams to work at the right stage and the right sequence inside of that stage, and the output for that stage or the deliverable had less issues. So the hypothesis simply was, if everyone on the project knows and agrees to what they are responsible for and delivers at the optimal time, things will be better for the project and for us. So how can we test this? We don't often, if at all, get the opportunity to get all the teams from the different disciplines in the same room. So an exercise was done from Plenary where 2 teams were given an exercise to execute. In both exercises, the teams were given 80 minutes. Both teams ran the same exercise. In the first exercise was for the first team, which followed a traditional approach where they had 10 minutes to plan, 60 minutes to model, and then 10 minutes to run clash detection. What was noticed was that they didn't spend a lot of time planning. They knew what they wanted to do. They sat in front of their computers and started modeling, and they spent a lot of time fixing clashes because there were quite a number of them. So in exercise 2, on the other hand, instead of 10 minutes planning, spend 20 minutes planning, and then 6 stages using that list of the priority structure. And after each stage, synchronize the models from different disciplines and quickly review them before the next stage. So the teams got up and started pool planning their tasks. So pool planning is having the end goal in mind first, and then what they need just before that, and just before that, and so on, until they come to what's needed to start off with. So basically planning backward with the end goal in mind. Instead of running off to start modeling, they had conversations with each other. Well, I'm not going to start off modeling lights until you have set the ceilings, so the architect would just need a 2D symbol on where the light would need to be. So there were a series of conversations that occurred that do not necessarily happen in the traditional approach. So the conversation was that, what do you need before you can actually model something? So this led to the discussions and prioritizing. So they realized that these are the items that are flexible and these are the items that are not as flexible. So an observation that was noted was that they were talking continuously throughout those 60 minutes, instead of it being a quiet room like it was in the previous exercise. Understanding what others are doing made everyone's contribution so much more powerful. So there are these exchanges of information that are required at each stage, and they also had those conversations early on in the planning stage. And the results were pretty amazing. In exercise 1, their average issues were 235 elements taking up the same space, etc. In exercise 2, there were only 63 issues, and they still had some time to come in and reduce that number. The same 80-minute period with a little bit of guidance, which made such a huge difference. So this leads us to the next chapter, how to get 53% fewer issues. So in the exercise with the 2 teams, we had 73% less issues, but then Plenary had implemented those ideals and guidelines and processes on 2 real-life projects that we had, which had then gotten the 53% less issues. So our thesis on this project was large batches cause information buildup. That buildup is the cause of issues. Misunderstandings are because of those issues, and more focused batches or stages will produce more focused and better results. This was the real project that was done, following the lean scoping, sequencing, and compared results to a similar project. So having a similar project to compare it to really helps us realize the significant differences in results. So how did they do that? So in any 3D model, you have a set of elements, and those elements are used to build the 3D model. And so it only makes sense to have a library of those elements that people can start off with. And we need to understand if an element is generic, or if you are doing a project for a client that has repeated elements, for example, McDonald's or Starbucks, that always have similar layouts with a series of specialized elements that are repeated. Or sometimes you can start off with generic elements that can be swapped out for more specialized ones. And it's important to have multi-party agreements, because if we carry on in closed doors, we are sure to have much more disagreements between stakeholders. And mutual agreements happen when all parties are in the same place doing pool planning. So in our current situation and our current work methods, we all can't be in the same room at the same time. So use online tools and programs to replicate that same process. It will become very, very powerful to get that agreement, as you have handoff of information and handoff of responsibility at the right time. So to get agreement, it must be less mandated. and more discussed and agreed on by teams, because it becomes their responsibility, because they had in the meeting agreed to it. And then we see that by creating more visual timelines is very powerful, because understanding someone else's scope is very difficult if it's just the word that they call it or the abbreviations that they use, because I don't speak that language. But by seeing that element itself in the scope, that can help me understand that, and being able to have teams sequence these activities at each stage. They can see exactly what the order is going to be and have notifications of when they should start their work. This helps teams realize what is important and not create work that will need rework later on. And as a result, we will have less issues. In the case we had, 98% of the constructability issues were solved as they went through. And also, they had project managers, architects, engineers, and not just the decision makers, but also people like the draftsmen and women, etc., who are doing the work, modeling and designing, the ones that are in the project, and also getting them involved to understand and fully be aware of how the timeline was built. And that got everyone to really trust each other. And in the end, not only did they have lesser issues, but also have 2 months, or also save 2 months, actually, on a 12-month design schedule. So clearer scope, smaller batches of work, and an output that was quicker and better for everyone. And you also end up with happier teams, because you are doing more focused and more effective work. So in conclusion, if everyone can agree in a collaborative way what they need to do and why for the good of the project, life will be good for everyone. But the problem that we have is that it is extremely difficult and challenging for industries where you had been used to having contracted using the traditional method, focused on your own scope and getting output to get paid, versus more collaborative planning and focusing on the good of the project and eliminating waste. You realize it's not just about tools, it's the processes and the workflows. And the future we see for BIM is the combination of tools and processes that enable teams to have more optimum outcomes, less waste, and become more efficient. And if you're trying to take on this task, don't feel overwhelmed. There's so many standards and processes when it comes to BIM that it may seem daunting, and not everybody will have the opportunity to run tests like these that were done biplannally. But if you were undertaking, or if you're undertaking this on a real life project, don't be overwhelmed. And also, you have assistance. Planoly is a platform to help you with this, to make sure that workflow is easy and clearly followed by you, by enabling teams to define a good and clear plan, a good and clear scope, getting agreement of the schedule of those tasks, and tracking the progress, and then dropping in a model to verify that we are meeting those objectives at each milestone. So setting out information delivery milestones, smaller batches of information, easier to transfer information, much more focused and much more efficient, and better results. So there are some resources to help your BIM team grow. I'll share the link in the chat. And book your masterclass accreditation sessions with us now. Also remember, this is a 10-part BIM management webinar series.